First, a couple of caveats. I had about 48 hours to put something together. I'm not an expert in this field. I've completed no formal research. And also, you got to consider the age factor. I'm getting to the point where I don't see any easy solutions to the problems we face in this world. I do spend a lot of time at Fort Leavenworth extracting and studying their media. So I guess that's my one claim to some sort of expertise. My thesis is rather simple. While it's nearly impossible to accurately measure, I maintain that the internet is having a minuscule effect on Russian civic awareness. 5 years ago, when I was here at KU, I put together some preliminary research on the value of blogs for people who want to understand what's going on in Russia. I've dusted off those slides. They're the ones that'll be in purple. I'll review some of those early findings and a couple of additional thoughts from the month I spent in Russia this past summer. The thesis, or the hypothesis that I came up with 5 years ago was that it was impossible for the intelligence analysts to derive any sort of meaningful data from Russian blogs because it was just too confusing. And what I looked at is that a lot of folks in the West declared Russia as being not free with regard to press freedoms, yet when you looked at their blogs, and for those of you who don't know Russian, these are making fun of their leadership. If you were to measure Russia by their blogs, you would say, no, wait a minute, they are absolutely free, and they shouldn't be labeled red. And so the question that I addressed at that time was, is there a connection between information on the internet and some sort of press freedom? And my conclusions, which I'll get to here in a second, then here's some more. And again, for those of you who don't know Russian, here they're making fun of the president, saying he's responsible for all sorts of crimes. But the conclusions I came up with then, I'll just go right to the conclusions, was we don't know the impact. And that using Marshall McLuhan's notion that the medium itself is the message, the internet or blogs, they carry no weight, they're merely a tool, they themselves are the message, and we can assign, they're neither good or bad. Is it a passing fad or evolving tool? I think that's still true. I think that the internet today, whether it's going to be around 20 years from now, good question. Whether blogs will be around, good question. For the intel analyst or someone trying to understand Russia via the internet, is it 1,000 points of light, ignorance, or dispersion? I mean, what points can you... This one is true that I think it's for all of us today who involved with using the internet, that we tend to, or what I've noticed is that it turns into something of an echo chamber. You go to those sites that support what you believe in, and you don't necessarily visit those sites that contradict what you necessarily believe in. So it forms these isolated circle of interest. We'll talk about that this one more covered. But the bigger one was more information, i.e. for Russians, does this lead to any positive action? And in this case, civic action. And that's my early conclusion 4 years ago, was that it did not. That more information did not lead to more civil action. And one of the quotes I used is, and I think this is still true today, the net serves as this giant relief valve. That if you're frustrated with society, you get on the net and you air those frustrations, and that therefore takes out some of your frustration. Rather than holding a picket on a street or storming the barricades, you use the net, and it's being used as a relief valve. And the final conclusion 4 years ago, when I came up with this, is that I don't know how many of you are familiar with Moby Dick. In Melville's Moby Dick, there's a character, Queequeg, who's a savage whose body is covered with this tattoo. The guy who put this tattoo on him, this priest, told him, hey, look it, the secret to this tattoo has all the wisdom in the world, all the information, all the holy writ from God. Unfortunately, the savage couldn't read the tattoo. My point was, it's just like the internet. Everything is there, but how do you decipher it? And for the intelligence analyst, for the guy who's trying to derive intelligence from this fire hose of information, it's nearly impossible. So that's where I was. How have things changed in the last 4 years? Well, there's still a lot of humor on the Russian internet. You can see here, for those of you who don't know Russian, what that says is the resident of the KGB, Obama, and they make a play on his name, his mission, default. And so again, there's still a lot of humor on the internet, and it reminded me of that anecdote. I was talking with Alex at the break. It reminded me of this anecdote where during the Soviet period, the Soviet guy runs into an American at Red Square, and the American turns to the Soviet and says, "You don't have press freedom here? You don't have freedom of speech?" And the Soviet guy goes, "Yes, we do." And the American goes, "Well, I can go to the middle of the mall in Washington, D.C. and proclaim Ronald Reagan is an idiot." And the Russian goes, "I can do this exact same thing. I can go right here in the middle of Red Square and say, Ronald Reagan is an idiot." And so it's changed, though. Today, I could have found 100 photos of Putin or Medvedev, the current leaders of Russia, making fun of them. But it doesn't really make a whole bunch of difference. Is there any greater civic awareness? And I would say that there's not. In the last 5 years, I could bore you with statistics. By and large, simple. There's much greater internet access and availability today in Russia than there was 5 years ago, and it's increasing. My prediction is that in 5 or 10 years, don't know how long, as technology continues to decrease, the price continues to decrease, these figures will be up to about 90, where they are in America. That they're going to be connected, and I have all sorts of who's looking, where are they looking, using smartphones, etc. The bottom line is it's improving, and pretty soon everybody's going to have it. What are they doing? And this one you can't read is probably the most important. What are they using the internet for? The same thing you and I are. Searching for information is top, reading the news, social networks, and email. Doing the exact same things that we're doing with the internet. Here, again, it's more side. Now they're saying that, as far as the internet, Russia's not. There is no censorship. There is some censorship going on in Russia, and this is what I look at daily. The Russian authorities haven't completely opened up their information space. They are doing certain things, everything from self-censorship, knowing that you don't want to say too much because they can track that individual IP address back to you and then put you in some sort of jeopardy. They can block sites. They've created laws that equate sort of freedom of speech with extremism. They've bought up some large platforms. They've got all sorts of hacktivists or activists who can troll and make your life miserable. The problem is the Russian authorities are working on this, but I want to say it's nominal. It's not that much. Let me get to my final points here. This is this summer at a protest in downtown Moscow. Again, Moscow is now a city of 12 or 15 million people, depending on where you draw the boundaries. This protest of the one opposition party drew a crowd of about 1,000. Most Russians, I hate to say it, they're apolitical. If you ask me where they are in 2011, most Russians are satisfied with the current regime. It's provided stability, and for a large percentage of Russians, that is enough. The point I want to make is increased information has not equated to greater civic awareness. I don't want to draw any analogies, but Berdyaev had a good quote, and he said, "Russians prefer freedom from the state to freedom within the state." And I think, for a lot of Americans, this last election cycle, we thought that, well, yeah, more information, we're going to have better politics. That isn't necessarily the case. And I want to now read a quote from Erich Fromm, who said, "Opinions formed by the powerless onlooker do not express his or her conviction, but are a game. Without information, deliberation, and the power to make one's own decision effective, democratically expressed opinion is hardly more than the applause at a sports event." Again, and I think the difference between Russia and the United States, without some sort of civil society, independent media, judicial system, the internet, all that idle chatter, it's really ineffective. I'm not even sure in this country all the chatter that we have is necessarily leading to better politics. I was thinking over lunch, 1991, when the internet sort of got off the ground, where we are today, is American society more just? Are people happier today with all this information? Again, I don't know you can draw a correlation between more information and better society. I go back, how did people 150 years ago? There was a Russian artist, Alexander Ivanov. He spent 20 years working on this picture, kind of like an early internet programmer saying, I'm going to write a program that are going to change the way people think. Spent 20 years on this, the appearance of Christ before the disciples or John the Baptist there. I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true or not, that Ivanov believed that people looking at this like an icon would somehow transform their very nature. That an image, I could show you an image, and it would transform your inner being. And I think, again, the painting was largely panned for being a disappointment because Christ is sort of in the background there, didn't really work, didn't really get his point across. But the image, or the idea that an image, a word, can somehow change your behavior, I think that's questionable. I'm not a complete iconoclast, but I wonder if modern man, particularly academics who put so much faith in words, whether they actually change human behavior. I think the notion that greater information in Russia will somehow lead to democracy is absurd. Absolutely absurd. And I'll finish on this final image. Again, I work as a military analyst. What that says is smoking will kill you, and that was taken this past June. One of the great revelations, I won't say great revelations, but one of the revelations I had as a military analyst 10 years ago was the fact that good intelligence does not lead to good policy. And you can look at Iraq, you can look at Afghanistan, you can pick a thing, but the idea that information leads to good behavior, that is false. And I think that is a conceit of modern man, that the idea that, well, words, I can somehow lead you to a better life. I don't know if that's true. The other image there, what that says is that the internet is like life. There's no point to it, but you don't want to leave. That's so typical of the fatalistic attitude I see among many people today, and not just Russians. So what is my conclusion? I'll just read this quote here from a woman who's done a lot more research on this than I have. The state does not interfere in the everyday lives of the people. The people do not interfere in the everyday affairs of the state. And I think more and more, again, they're talking about Russia there, but I think more and more that sentiment is spreading. And I think that we're wrong to think that somehow this thing, the internet, is going to increase or improve our democracy. I don't see that connection. Thank you.